Hello everyone! As I mentioned before, I've never had an SNES, so when I saw a listing on eBay for 3 broken ones, I grabbed it. Today I'm going to try and diagnose and fix one with power issues. As you can see, with it plugged in, the power switch does nothing, not even a light. So let's open it up, see if we can figure out what's going on. Opening the SNES needs a gambit screwdriver and only requires removing 6 screws. I did take some time to do some very simple diagnostics beforehand to save us a bit of time. The first thing I did was a few connectivity checks. I started by checking continuity with my multimeter from the rear power plug to the board, then checked the fuse to make sure it hadn't blown. After that, worked my way through the diode, switch, voltage regulator, and down through the capacitors. Everything came back showing what I expected, which was kind of curious. Visual inspection of the board told me it was in surprisingly good shape, so I was a bit stumped. Next step was plugging it in and checking the voltage in and through the regulator. At first, things seemed a bit flaky to me. I could see 12 volt in and 5 volt out of the regulator, which is exactly what we'd expect, but the readings were coming and going. Poking around a bit, I actually wasn't able to get a reading by grounding to anywhere other than the negative lead of the power jack. I also noticed when I did get a reading, the LED on the front of the console would turn on, which you can see here. All these together told me something wasn't connected, regardless of what my earlier continuity checks, and it had to be touchy enough that it would bridge the connection when I touched it. Long story short, the negative lead of the power jack wasn't making a stable contact with the board, and by probing it, I had applied just enough pressure to bridge that connection. Overall, means it's a really simple fix. First, I'll desolder the old connection, clean it up with some isopropyl alcohol, then resolder it to try and get a better connection. I'll do that now. Getting the board out of the shell is actually pretty straightforward. I'll start by removing the eject arm and making sure not to lose the spring. Then there are a number of screws to move the switch aside. You don't need to remove the shielding from the lower half of the board, but I find it makes it easier to work with. Plus, you get to inspect that section of the board, and you have to remove the screws to get it out of the case anyway. I carefully remove the shielding, making sure to disconnect the controller port ribbon first. I've already looked under the top shielding, so I won't bother with that. All my capacitors look good and the power circuits work fine, so I don't see a need to do it again. Now with the support screws removed, the board comes out and I can flip it over and begin to work on the pads. As I mentioned, I'll start by desoldering and cleaning the old connections, then I'll resolder them and clean up any leftover flux. Now that that's done, I'll do some continuity tests. And it's still being a bit temperamental. There could be an issue with the pad it connects to, so as a temporary fix, I'll just solder in from the top and hope to bridge it. I'll probably end up replacing the whole power jack in the future, honestly, just to be safe. one final check with the multimeter once it's done, and other than my probe slipping off, no problems. All that's left to do is put everything back together and test it out. Putting it back together is the exact same steps as taking it apart, but in reverse. Before putting in the final screws, I'm just going to plug it in and test it. Now that it's turning on consistently, I can close it up and test it on my TV. I don't have footage of the test, but the picture comes up beautifully and my controller's working, so I'm just going to call this fixed. Trying to get my hands on a service cartridge so I can test all the hardware, but so far I haven't seen any issues with this one. I was planning to do another video deep diving into the issues with my other SNES consoles, but it seems like all they needed was a good deep cleaning, since they're working just fine right now. I'll double check once I get the service card in. Anyway, thanks for watching, and I hope to see you in the next one.